FM, Salford City Radio, 94.4 FM, the Friday Sports Show with your host, Jimmy Petruzzi, bringing you all the news from the local area and around the world. And we bring you some really interesting guests. We've been very fortunate to bring you some of the world's best athletes, sports people. We've talked to people in different roles in sport, coaches, managers, athletes. We also have a segment where we interview people in the field of mental health and psychology and related fields who talk about their work. We've had some really important or key, huge names in the world of psychology as well. So it's been fantastic. And today we have a really fascinating guest. It's sort of going to stay with the theme of sports psychology. He's a sports psychology consultant, applied practitioner in Bristol. He also lectures in Southampton, and he has a number of roles that I'm sure he'll tell us more about on the show as we discuss in more detail. So, Connor Grant, welcome to the show. Great to have you on board.
Yeah, thanks, Jimmy. Awesome to have these kind of opportunities. I very much appreciate you reaching me out, getting me on here. I've heard and listened to some amazing pods and radio shows you've had so far. So look forward to contributing. But yeah, thanks, Jimmy.
Brilliant. No, great to have you on board, and you do like a lot of different work as well, and it shows the versatility of sports psychology. I think that the skill being transferable. I suppose with yourself, kind of, if we start from the beginning. What sort of motivated you to go into the field of sports psychology?
Oh, yeah. Do you want to start there, Jimmy? I think it was an early passion for just sports performance itself. I reckon the phrase "jock of all, master of none" probably rings as true as anything else. I was fortunate to play rugby, cricket, tennis, a bit of footy as well to a county level. Some of those sports I took to a national level when I was younger, in the under 16s and under 18s. Was probably arguably the most sporty kid at my school. So that pathway was pretty much just led on. Really, I had an interest in coaching. I was tennis coaching from the age of 16 as well, so relatively young. Just gave everything a crack, really, Jimmy. I think that it maybe stunted my progress in one sport, but it meant that everything was really exciting and fresh in all of the others. I never got any of this burnout or over competing, because I'd always have summer to do my cricket, winter to get stuck in with my rugby, and it really helped me now, Jimmy. It's really helped me understanding athletes of different disciplines, and then I guess from the sort of then it went to sports science. So there was an option to go the full-time athlete route, but started a student athlete route in Chichester. So I studied sports science down there. Really, really good campus. Sport is massive down there, and that was really, really cool. Started to get into the mental side of performance, but in all honesty, I think again it was quite all consuming. I was playing sport, I was learning about sport, I was reading about sport. Everyone was asking me about how did this go, and it got a bit much, and it took a bit of a disconnect, really. I took myself out of that environment. I went back to South Africa, where my family are from. I did some teaching, and loved just going back to teaching and coaching again. And there was a lady out in South Africa, a very, very good sports psychologist by the name of Kirsten van Heerden, and she was an ex-swimmer who does a lot of work on self-worth and identity. And she kind of gave me a roadmap. She said, "Listen, Con, you still love people, you still love sports and psychology. Why don't you give it a crack?" And she told me it was a long road. I didn't think it would be quite this long. And it lit a bit of a spark, really, Jimmy. And that then led me on to kind of the masters and the accreditation I'm doing now, and then plying my trade in Australia, back in Africa, and now back in the UK. So. Yeah, long story short, bud, but I guess that's where you meet me today on this show.
Yeah, no, it's powerful stuff. I mean, it's really interesting stuff that you say. I think it's, obviously everyone's journey is different in terms of, becoming or working in sport in various roles. Yourself, it seems to me that as well as getting experience from academia, your life experiences too, like traveling and going to different places as well. Do you think in the way you work now, the way you perceive sport from the point of view of, South Africa, and you mentioned Australia there, do you think that your experiences in different countries has had an impact in the way you sort of see sport? Has that sort of helped you, do you think, your sort of paradigm, sort of seeing the way things are done in other places too?
massively, Jimmy, and I think that can't be understated. Really, is the kind of the little nuances, really, in terms of the landscape in Australia. That one was far more on the edge of. There was a lot of parental involvement in the sports that I was working with out there. There was a lot of respect for all aspects of performance. Sports science was at the forefront, really, and there was a really good acceptance to the psychological side of sports psychology. The caveat to that from the Oz perspective would be that it wasn't quite as regulated. So in terms of the kind of professionals that were working in sports psychology, I mean, you had all sorts. You had ex-Wallaby who were masters of the mind, and struggling to get jobs. So it's fascinating what you can learn on the road. I'd argue that I've probably learned more from LEDCs, so for working in countries like Ghana and Fiji, where sport for some of these talented youngsters is everything. You've got guys chucking a rugby ball around on the beaches of Fiji where it's pure joy and enthusiasm and escapism, and it's just like they are so deeply embodied in sport. It gets you really thinking about what sport is at its crux, that it is the release from, and especially now in the climate that we're all in, like how powerful it can be.
Absolutely.
And I learned so much from those young athletes in those for want of a better word, third world countries. It was so eye-opening, Jimmy.
Yeah, it's interesting you say. I mean, when you sort of see Fiji play in the rugby in the sevens, and even in rugby, world rugby as well, it's almost like watching the sort of the 12-year-old self who takes up sport, the enjoyment. They throw the ball about, and just the buzz from watching him play. Sometimes obviously sport can become commercial, the pressures, the expectation, but just sort of watching him, like you said, it's a joy to see him play. But also I can imagine, say, Ghana, for example, they've produced some great footballers over the years. It's almost like a way for them to, financially. So does that play a role in terms of the psyche of the athlete? So you've got, a footballer in Ghana who thinks, okay, if I can break in the Premier League, then I can help my friends, my family, financially. In Fiji, just you get up in the morning and they just love, sort of pure love of the game. Do you think that sort of impacts the psyche of the player as well?
Yeah, massively, Jimmy. And actually, what you find is in a lot of specifically African countries, the son then becomes the breadwinner. There gets to a tipping point where they're expected then to source for their families, and similar in Fiji, really, Jimmy, is that you've got the young son who goes off to play rugby in France is then expected to feed the family back home, and then the villages to some extent as well. And
yes,
and you think it does play a part in their motivators. It's quite powerful when they've got that kind of that urge to get the best out of their stuff and realise that the financial side of it can really pull them and their family through some desperation and some hardships. So that was interesting. But what I was just surprised with is how that doesn't really weigh on their shoulders when they're competing. They kind of put that on the back burner in terms of that extrinsic motivation, but when they're on the football pitch in Accra or on the sand dunes in Viti Levu in Fiji, it is just that word that you said, Jimmy, just joy in abundance. And joy is synonymous with being present, and as we know, in I think just about any high performance sport, the more present you are, the more likely you are to find that gap in the defensive line or hit the bullseye. So I think that was just so raw and so special to see the link between their drivers off the pitch and that pure simplicity and the expression on the pitch.
Would you say, I mean, that's really interesting stuff you say there about being in the moment, and we sort of hear a lot about being in the moment in the last few years, predominantly as sort of mindfulness has become secular and been introduced into business and sport as well. Do you think that's sort of a case for life as well, where you can transfer some of this in life, especially in these difficult times where there's so much going on, so much information, so many things that are changing, just sometimes saying, what, I'm going to just be in the moment. Did you find from a life point of view, kind of your experiences sort of helped you as well? And it's probably a deep question to ask, but
deeper the better, No, I think it can have some really, really powerful relates into the current world and your day-to-day mindsets. As you know, like as soon as we're thinking to the future, then you're thinking about anxiety. As soon as you're in the past, you're thinking about worry or like some unhealthy self-comparisons or some sort of fear. So I think you're spot on, really, and I do work on this with my athletes specifically now with the pandemic. Is what can we load up on? What present moment activities? What accesses to, like, for want of a better word, like some flow states can we get each day to really kind of stay present and stay in that place where we know that everything is a little bit more glass half full and silver tinted. It's not. It's not always possible, and we've almost got to normalize the moments when we're thinking to the future and we're thinking to the past. But yeah, definitely, Jimmy. I think because I've seen it, because I've experienced what it's like to, I've seen what it's like for people to have so little but to be so present, be so giving. It does give me a good benchmark to go back to when I feel like I'm feeling a bit hard done by or a bit hard up. I think, well, actually, this really isn't that bad. Let's be present with this and accept this for what this is, because I've seen people far worse off, thriving in their environments. Yeah,
that's really powerful stuff, and I think that it's almost like in your approach, Connie, you have this sort of philosophical view in terms of life and sport as well. Did that sort of come from, you mentioned there, being from South Africa? Obviously, South Africa is a great, country, wonderful country, but obviously it has had its challenges over the years, like any other country. But obviously, there is, there has been no doubt sort of challenges around, income and stability. Is that something that you sort of in your development that sort of contribute to your sort of philosophy in the way you sort of see sport and life in general?
Yeah, I'd be a fool not to mention that impact, really, Jimmy. Yeah, although I've obviously been brought up in the UK, my is attached to my South African family, my South African mother. Not all South Africans I could vouch for this, but certainly most of the ones that I've been around have got a certain warmth about their character. They've got there isn't any of pressures, challenge. Kind of like just my mother. It's probably what my mother's instilled in me. Wanting to reach out, and that is sports psychology, performance psychology. I think at its crux, in a nutshell, is that willingness to help others and get the very best out of each individual. And I think I was potentially given a nice, handy head start in that through my mother's teachings and understanding of what wealth really is, actually. Yeah, I don't know if that's your question, Jimmy, because that's a tricky one's perfect.
It does, for sure, and sort of, I sort of just reflecting, the reason being was that when I watched the Rugby World Cup when England played South Africa, and South Africa had won the World Cup, and just some of the interviews of the players, they just seemed to be really humble and talked about how the challenges that some of them faced, growing up and what they'd seen, and it was just sort of a humble attitude where sport was an opportunity to go out there and play. It was really fascinating to me, just the psychology and some, like watching some of the interviews of the players on TV, thinking, wow, that's a really powerful perspective, really, in terms of the way they saw the world. Sometimes we've got to put things into perspective, really, in terms of sport being the way it is. Absolutely, I think so, for sure. But you have different roles. You mentioned, we sort of talked about the role with the canoeing team, and can you tell us a bit about that? What you do there as well? Is that okay to sort of
Yeah, of course. Yeah, definitely, Jimmy, and I think that's kind of like the doors of sports psychology is what's quite exciting there, is that although my background is predominantly field-based sports, the opportunity to work in a completely new discipline like canoeing was just awesome. You've got a very, very different kind of psyche and mindset to training there. There's a lot of quantifiable data in canoeing. They're often after these different times and these heart rates, and And I think it can be quite all-consuming for these young athletes. So I work predominantly with young adolescent paddlers in a kind of volunteering space, and it's been quite nice, really, just to get to understand like those different psyches, those personas, and how we can maybe find different outlets for these young guys and girls, because it is very consuming. You know, they're full-time A-level students. They're canoeing 5 to 6 times a week. It's very individualized, you know, and I've enjoyed bringing a bit of a team, a collective aspect to their training and their training camps. That's been quite powerful, I think, between myself and the other talent psychs there. And there's some brilliant coaches in that setup as well, Jimmy, who are really valuing the person before the paddler. I think that's really important, is, you know, meeting each of these young guys and girls on their level, and trying to, you know, make sure that, you know, we're not going to get to any burnouts or any kind of loss or disinterest in the sport. We're keeping it dynamic and fascinating. You know, canoe sprint it's an amazing world. It's all power. It's quite impressive to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I certainly, you know, in the Olympics, whenever I watch the Olympics, canoeing is one of them sports. The Olympic canoeing anyway. That's really fascinating to watch. Absolutely, there's the strength, the sheer upper body strength, and obviously stability they've got, and the mental focus and concentration is incredible. I think you made a really good point there, Connor, about, you know, valuing the person before the sport. And unfortunately in football, I know I don't want to ever go at football. I love the game. I'm still involved in the game now, and there's a lot of positives, but certainly in my experience in football over the years, it's been something that needs to change. Sometimes the value is on what the player can bring as a player, which is understandable to a point. Obviously, you can understand that we all want to produce great players to go on to do good things. But how important is it, do you think, for coaches to sort of, you know, we've seen, you know, obviously there's many variable factors at play in terms of, you know, players obviously struggling when they retire or get released. But how important do you think it is to sort of value that young performer as a person, not just as an athlete?
I think paramount, Jimmy, definitely. I think if you've got a young mind that's so malleable, it's so impressioned by things. The last thing you really want is to tell a 16-year-old, you know, you're a footballer, you're going to be a footballer for the rest of your life, son. That can, you know, some 16-year-olds will bite your hand off and be like, oh great, that sounds amazing, but then 20 years down the line, they realise that, you know, there's a career termination there, or all it takes, sadly, is one twist of a knee on the pitch, and that could be a life-ending, or a career-ending injury. So yeah, I think it's so important to really work with each individual and understanding just different facets to their being. And coaches do this in a variety of different ways. You know, they can throw it into different workshops where we talk around athletic identity and, you know, who are you off the water? If we're talking about a paddler, well, are you a brother? Are you a sister? Are you the person who contributes socially? Are you, the introvert? Are you the deep thinker? Are you the philosopher? Are you Charlotte, who also loves horse riding and has like a real passion for animal conservation? Like, I think there's such a beauty in getting people to embrace their full selves, so that, you know, heaven forbid, but if any adversity comes along, and especially now with COVID, we're finding a lot of athletes who are so attached to their identity as the footballer or the rugby player, who can hit 10 times harder, you know, than a youngster who's got these different avenues through the coach figuring that out for them. And then, I think that could be really powerful, Jimmy.
Absolutely, I think that's a great thing, and obviously, you know, it's only sort of, no doubt there's a lot more to it than that, and we sort of scratched the surface on that. But for our listeners, I think that for me that's imperative. I know there's a lot of sort of football clubs doing great work now, but there's still a long way to go. And for me, and that's not just football, singling football out, no doubt there's a lot of other sports too, but it's great to see that sort of canoeing is sort of doing that, and sort of, because I think that's really important. Like he says, that, you know, the young people, the brain's malleable, you know, they feel the same, you know, the emotions they feel can be really intense, and if you've got your heart set on being this sort of sports person, you've placed all your value around that, then and I suppose not even if you get injured or end your career, just generally speaking, you know, life in general, how one feels about themselves as well is key too. Do you guys spend like with your athletes, do you do a lot of work in that area? Do you what sort of proportion of your work, is sort of based on that kind of just out of interest?
Jimmy, it really depends on the individual.
Yeah.
If you've got a young performer who's interested in their own behaviours, their personality traits, then that can form a large part of this. You kind of go with the idea of feeding the hungry, and if the hungry are interested in the mental skills training ahead of maybe more figuring themselves out, then that's the avenue you might take. There's different approaches. If I'm working with a young, let's use the example of like a young gymnast who comes to me and says, and it's the forefront, and they say, right, well, I'm interested in why I felt this way under pressure in this situation, or I'm interested in why I reacted like this when the coach told me this. Then that's going to then think, okay, well, maybe we need to look around this kind of behaviour, self-awareness piece more than, right, how do we visualise for your next, gymnastics sequence? So, yeah, it really depends on the kind of the feedback and the needs analysis that you do with those individuals, Jimmy.
Absolutely, yeah, no, for sure. That's a great point you've made, and our listeners as well, for them sort of, getting them to, letting them understand more about that. And I suppose I sense that obviously time is of the essence. You've only got so much time, and in the time you've got, we'd love to do everything we possibly can, but I suppose you've got to prioritise. I suppose in any high performance sport, performance is the paramount. Sort of going forward, and there's only so many hours in the day to do so many different things. So I suppose in the big picture, it would, a program, sort of development program, where you could cover different things would be quite useful. But you mentioned there, like some of the athletes you work with doing A levels and so on and so forth. Do you find that doing the sports psych is beneficial for their academia to be able to regulate themselves emotionally, visualize, self-talk, all these sort of skills? Do you find, I know it's difficult, obviously, it's just your own experience, but do you find it's a useful thing for them, for academia as well?
Yeah, huge transferable benefits, I'd say, Jimmy. I think, I think the sky's the limit there in terms of what you can work on, say, for the football pitch, how that relates to the exam hall. It's so similar. It's all part of, again, that self-awareness piece, really, Jimmy, is understanding, your own mindsets in pressure situations. Can you work on, that emotional regulation in different moments in the day, and that doesn't have to be, we've got a penalty kick. That can be when you're joining a house party at the age of 16 and you don't know anybody and you're getting nervous and you're about to hop in the car with mum and dad, but maybe a deep breath and a bit of a present moment trigger might make that so yeah,
absolutely.
Absolutely. It is Jimmy, there's so much there that I think can help. It can be tricky educating the younger population on how these skills can matter outside of their sport. So it's good to have some clear-cut examples there really for them. I think it's far easier as we keep using the football example, but far easier for a young footballer to think about how self-talk can help him on the pitch compared to how it can help him on his first date kind of thing. So,
absolutely, and absolutely. That's a great point. And sometimes, it's one of them really. I suppose it's a double-edged sword kind of, where it's one of them where, it's like only so many people can be a professional footballer, only so many can win the gold or win a medal, and it's a very small percentage in proportion to how many people compete. But I suppose in the other side of things, it's like, well, why not me? Why not you? Type thing. And I think, do you think the sensible thing is to sort of say, okay, well, statistically, to be a pro footballer and to maintain that status for so many years, if you base it on the people who play football, is minimal, or to win a goal. But equally in saying that, you can just be the best you can be and see where it takes you.
Yeah, massively, Jimmy. I think it's just that. It's just understanding that. If you give yourself the best possible chance, and you're exploring different avenues, you've got a bit of, again, that growth mindset to learning, then what is there to stop you? If you know that you're putting in all the work and you're leaving no stones unturned, then the rest of it you've almost just got to leave down to a bit of that serendipity, a bit of chance. Because as you say, if you're doing all the right things your side, what will be will be. I think that's a fair point, Jimmy. Definitely.
Yeah, and you can look back in life. I mean, obviously, if you get released by a football club, you don't play pro, you don't win the gold, but at least you can look back and say, well, you know what, I gave it everything. I left nothing in the tank, and I'm okay with it. I got as far as I could, and it might have been down to a few different variables, but they were out of my control. I did what I could, and I think there's something to be said for that. And I sort of sense yourself in terms of your sports career. It benefited you, and you mentioned you gave it your all, and you tried different sports, and I suppose success is relative to the individual, really, in terms of just being the best they can be. But I suppose one thing to think about, so, I mean, with all the skills you've got now, obviously all the travel you've done and all the sort of education you've done, if you were sort of speaking to a younger Connor, what would you say, and a deep question to ask, but what would you sort of say to your younger self, kind of, making your way in the game of sport? Would you have said, maybe focus on one sport? Would you have said, you know what, you're on, is there any sort of words of wisdom you would have sort of said looking back on things?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Jimmy. I think there's a fair bit of research out there now, isn't there, in varying your different sports and not specialising too early. You've obviously got your examples of young athletes. So I used like Andre Agassi potentially as an example, where it was all tennis from a very, very young age, and his dad made that the focal point. And yes, and I think that the real kind of side effects of testing too early. I just think the joy that I got, the kind of like the variety of different people that you meet in different sporting disciplines, and it just really builds your own life knowledge. It builds your own personal skills, or has built my own personal skills far more. Let's say, Connor, who was just married to the tennis circuit for 10 years. That's quite a, no disrespect to those individuals. I think they're amazing individuals, but that's quite like an enclosed, a close-knit community. There's much diversity there, and so I think that would be the big one, really, Jimmy. It's just I've always tried to be a bit of a yes man, and I think that is so important. Is keep accepting and going for opportunities until your gut instinct tells you otherwise. I don't think there's any harm in giving everything a crack. It's that would be my semi wisdom, I guess.
No, absolutely. It's it's the key. I think it's obviously it's one of them, and I think it's sort of refreshingly honest. Really, it's easy to say, well, do this, that, and the other, but you do the best you can at a time, and like you said, it's sort of looking at the positives and sort of bringing them forward. But what about your vision going forward in the field of sports side? Kind of, where do you sort of see yourself? What's the sort of next step for you? Obviously, it's a challenging, obviously, no doubt to continue the work that you're doing, but what do you sort of see yourself? What's your sort of your vision for you in your profession?
Yeah, I think the crux of it, Jimmy, is to try and understand, what lines up with my moral compass. You've got a lot of people in the world of sport and exercise psychology who are looking at it from like a stability perspective. So they're probably going at the bottom of that pyramid and thinking safety first, and that can be a good thing. You can get into the corporate world and you can get good financial support for your services using the parallels of performance psychology in that sphere. But to be honest, Jimmy, I've got most satisfaction from working at a grassroots level, as I alluded to earlier, working with those who are hungry and those who have got that sheer appetite to improve, and that's been in those countries you mentioned earlier. So your Ghanas, your Fijis. I would love to set up a platform or a connect where we're working on like psychological skills and self-development through that sort of space. What that looks like in 5 years' time, I'm really not sure, but I want to kind of dovetail that alongside my own self-development. So yes, I think giving back to the right kind of peoples is important, but I've also got to give myself the best chance of giving them the best information, if that makes sense. So I've got to try and keep self-developing, keep doing the right things. I don't really want to cut any corners and not get qualified here, or not get that kind of research nailed down. So yeah, I think to me, PhD would be the big picture there. Later down the line, finding a real research area that I think suits me and suits the people I'd be applying it with. There's a lot lot out there.
You know, you got to, sort of definitely sort of you've achieved a lot, and I know that you sort of got a bright career ahead of you, many years, no doubt, ahead of you for sure. In terms of sort of our listeners, if anyone wants to sort of, get in touch in any areas that we spoke about, do you have like a website or whatever people have these days, pages or, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Jimmy. Yeah, it would be sportguru.me. That's my own kind of platform. You can see a little bit around the sort of previous work I've done, some bits on my services in the sports psych side of things. So I'm on LinkedIn. I haven't got an Instagram page up and running yet.
Yeah.
And, I'm not quite wild on the old Twitter sphere. Maybe I'll get there. But yeah, that's me really, Jimmy. But always really keen to receive different feedbacks and interests from all sorts of parties, really. Hence why I was really excited to get on here, Jimmy, which has been really nice of you to get me on. And
yeah, I think great speaking to you for sure. I know that listeners have really enjoyed it, and really interesting, fascinating insights into your career. I think given that you've worked in so many different places as well, and you've got the academia behind you too, it's been really fascinating insight, really. No doubt for our listeners and for myself too. But I really want to thank you for coming aboard the show, Connor. It's been great speaking to you, and wish you every success. And no doubt we'll sort of see how things progress, and we'll keep an eye out for your developments as a in the field of sports psych. So thanks for coming on board the show, Connor. It was great to speak to you and share some of the insights with our listeners.
Jimmy, absolute pleasure, man. Thanks so much, and you stay well and safe. And I'll be watching this show's progress, your progress as we go as well, Jimmy. So
thank you.
Thanks so much.
Great stuff. That was Connor Grant, who gave us a really fascinating insight into his field of work and what he does, and really fascinating stuff. Having worked in different parts around the world and applying sports psychological principles, not just in sport but in other areas too. So 94.4 FM, Salford City Radio, if you host Jimmy Petruzzi, bring you all the news from the local area and around the world.